A billionaire thought he could buy everything until kind waitress held his disabled son and showed him what money could never give. Under the soft light of the diner's neon sign, Richard pushed the glass door open with his free hand while his other arm steadied his son. He was used to places where waiters rushed forward, where tables were dressed in crisp white sheets, and meals were served like clockwork. This diner was nothing like that. The smell of frying bacon and coffee hung in the air, and the tables were filled with ordinary people chatting over late breakfasts. Richard wasn't comfortable here, but it was the only place nearby, and his son had insisted he was hungry. Ethan, his little boy with big brown eyes, shuffled slowly beside him. The child walked with difficulty, dragging one foot slightly because of his condition. Every step took effort. Richard could feel the eyes of other customers glancing at them before quickly turning back to their plates. He guided Ethan to a booth by the window and helped him sit down. Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket, demanding attention. And without thinking, he pulled it out and began scanning emails. The boy sat quietly, fiddling with a small toy car in his hands. He made a soft humming sound, the way he often did when he was nervous in a new place. Richard didn't notice. His focus was on stock numbers flashing across his screen. He was a man who had built companies, who signed contracts worth millions. But when it came to understanding his son's moods, he felt clumsy and lost. A young waitress came over with a notepad tucked into her apron. Her name tag read Anna. She smiled at Ethan first before greeting Richard, as if the child was the most important customer. Richard gave a brief nod, hardly looking up from his phone, and ordered quickly pancakes for his son, coffee for himself. Anna jotted it down and leaned toward Ethan with warmth in her voice, asking if he liked syrup or butter. The boy tilted his head shyly but didn't answer. She didn't push him. Instead, she gave him a smile that lingered long enough to make him relax. When she walked away, Ethan tried to roll his toy car across the smooth table, but it slipped from his weak grip and clattered onto the floor. His face tightened, and he made a frustrated sound, reaching down but unable to pick it up. Richard noticed only when the boy let out a small cry. With a sigh, he put down his phone and bent halfway out of the booth. But before he could move further, Anna appeared. She crouched down, picked up the toy, and didn't just hand it back, she placed it gently into Ethan's hand and whispered something that made him giggle. Richard froze. Giggle. That sound rarely came from his son in public. It startled him. Ethan clutched the toy and looked at Anna as though she was some kind of secret friend. She touched his shoulder lightly before standing again, and Richard watched with a flicker of confusion. As their food arrived, Anna set Ethan's plate carefully in front of him. She cut the pancakes into small pieces without asking, in a way that showed she had noticed his hands didn't move like other children's. Richard should have been the one to do that. But instead he found himself watching her every movement. She spoke to Ethan gently, her tone patient, as if there was no rush in the world. Ethan listened to her more than he ever listened to his father. Richard sat back, his coffee untouched, his phone forgotten on the table. He studied his son's face, the wide smile, the eager eyes. It was so rare to see Ethan this relaxed outside of the house. Usually, public places overwhelmed him. Yet here he was, munching pancakes, sometimes glancing at Anna as if making sure she was still nearby. For Richard, it was an uncomfortable revelation. He had all the money he could ever need. He had hired specialists, bought expensive therapies, and filled their home with equipment meant to help Ethan. But none of it had brought this simple joy. A waitress in a small diner had done in minutes what he had struggled to do for years. When Anna returned to check on them, Ethan suddenly stretched out his small hand and touched hers. She didn't pull back, didn't seem surprised. She knelt beside him, holding his hand as if it was the most natural thing. The boy leaned toward her, resting against her arm. Richard's throat tightened. He had never seen his son cling to a stranger like that. Anna noticed Richard's expression, but didn't comment. She simply smiled, gave Ethan a reassuring pat, and told him she would be right back with more chocolate milk. The boy nodded eagerly, eyes following her until she disappeared behind the counter. Richard sat still, staring at the space she had left. He didn't understand what had just happened. Why could this young woman someone he didn't know? someone with no medical training reach into Ethan's guarded little world so easily? He felt a sharp twist of jealousy, mixed with something else he couldn't name. The rest of the meal passed with Ethan calmer than Richard had ever hoped for. Whenever Anna came by, Ethan lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. She spoke to him as though he was not broken or difficult, but just a boy who deserved kindness. She didn't talk down to him, didn't pity him, and yet she seemed to understand his every small gesture. By the time Richard paid the bill, his mind was still spinning. He handed Anna his credit card without a word, his eyes flicking between her and his son. Ethan clung to his toy car and gave her a wave when they left. She waved back, her smile warm and genuine. As Richard guided Ethan out of the diner, he looked back once more. Anna was wiping down a table, moving quickly as the diner filled with new customers, her smile lingering from Ethan's goodbye. Something stirred deep inside Richard, thought he tried to push away. For the first time in years, he questioned himself. Was he truly doing enough for his son? Or had he been hiding behind his wealth, blind to the fact that what Ethan needed most wasn't money, but human connection? That night, long after Ethan had fallen asleep, Richard sat alone in his study. The glow from his computer screen showed numbers, contracts, messages waiting for his approval, but his thoughts weren't on business. They circled back to the diner, to Anna's gentle voice, to Ethan's laughter. He had seen something that unsettled him more than any business failure could. The billionaire father had spent years controlling everything around him. Yet here he was, shaken by the sight of a waitress holding his son's hand. He didn't know why, but he knew this moment would not leave him. Something had shifted, something small but powerful. And though he couldn't name it yet, he sensed that his life and his son's had begun to change in ways money alone could never control. The next week, Richard found himself pulling into the same small diner again. It wasn't planned, at least that's what he told himself. There were dozens of restaurants in the city, places where people like him belonged. Yet somehow, his car ended up parked in the same spot, his son holding his hand as they walked inside. Ethan's eyes lit up the moment he recognized the place, and Richard noticed it. He rarely saw his boy so eager to enter a public place. They slid into the same booth by the window. Ethan pressed his hands against the glass, leaving tiny smudges, humming softly. Richard sat across from him, checking his phone out of habit, but part of him was waiting to see if she was there. Then she appeared. Anna walked toward them with her notepad, that familiar smile brightening her face when she spotted Ethan. She greeted the boy first, crouching beside him. "Hi, buddy," she said warmly, as if she'd been waiting all week to see him. Ethan looked up, his cheeks lifting into a rare grin, and he made a sound that almost sounded like hi. Richard set down his phone. He wasn't sure he had ever seen his son respond like that to anyone outside of family. Anna remembered his favorite drink without asking and brought it, over with a bendy straw already tucked inside. Ethan clapped his hands softly, rocking with excitement. Richard blinked. Nobody else, not even his nannies, thought of small details like that unless he instructed them. As they ordered, Anna chatted lightly, but her attention always drifted back to Ethan. She asked him what kind of toy cars he liked, though she didn't expect an answer. When he pushed his little blue car across the table toward her, she played along, rolling it back gently. Ethan squealed, and Richard felt his chest tighten. He hadn't heard that sound since Ethan was much younger. Over the next few visits, Richard found himself coming back again and again. At first, he told himself it was only because Ethan seemed calmer here. But deep down, he knew he wanted to see the way Anna interacted with his son. She never treated him like a burden. She never looked uncomfortable. Instead, she spoke with patience. Her words filled with the kind of kindness that didn't need effort. It was simply who she was. Richard started asking her questions, though he did it casually, as if he wasn't deeply curious. Where had she learned to handle children like Ethan? Did she have experience? Anna only laughed softly and shook her head. She explained that she worked double shifts to pay her bills and had taken care of her younger siblings for years. She didn't have any special training, but she always believed every child deserved patience and dignity. One evening, as they sat in the booth again, Richard asked her what she wanted to do in life. She hesitated, then admitted her dream was to become a physical therapist. She loved helping people, but school was expensive, and she barely made enough to cover rent. Richard didn't show much reaction, but her words stayed in his mind. While Ethan happily munched on pancakes, Richard studied Anna's face. He noticed the tiredness around her eyes, the way she moved quickly between tables, and the smile she forced even when she was clearly exhausted. Yet no matter how tired she was, she never let it show when she looked at his son. Ethan grew attached quickly. He refused to sit anywhere unless Anna was the one serving them. If another waiter came by, he grew restless, sometimes even upset. But the moment Anna appeared, he calmed down. She always remembered what soothed him, whether it was placing his toy within reach, bringing extra napkins, or speaking softly when the diner grew loud. Richard couldn't ignore it. His son, who usually hid behind him or grew anxious in public, was changing in front of his eyes. He wasn't just eating his food. He was laughing, trying to talk, even showing his toy to strangers. When Anna encouraged him, Richard had spent thousands of dollars on doctors and specialists, but nothing compared to this waitress who simply cared. He found himself watching her even when she wasn't at their table. He saw how she treated every customer, how she gave the same warm smile to an elderly couple, or how she picked up a dropped spoon for a toddler without being asked. She moved quickly, balancing plates, but never made anyone feel rushed. The more time Richard spent in the diner, the more he realized something uncomfortable. He had been absent. He had been so busy building empires, attending meetings, and signing deals that he had left the most important part of life unattended: his son. He felt shame gnawing at him as he watched Anna do what he, with all his wealth, had failed to do: make Ethan feel seen. One late afternoon, when the diner was less busy, Anna sat with Ethan for a few minutes. She showed him how to stack creamers into a little tower. He giggled, knocking them down with his toy car. Richard watched silently, his hands folded on the table. Anna looked up at him briefly, her smile soft but curious, as if she could see through his polished suit and expensive watch into the lonely man behind them. Richard cleared his throat, unsure why his voice felt tight. He asked if she ever thought about leaving the diner. Anna laughed lightly, saying she didn't really have the luxury of dreaming too much. Bills, rent, and taking care of her family came first. Still, her eyes flickered with a spark when she talked about her dream of helping children walk again, of working in hospitals or clinics where she could make a difference. Ethan tugged at her sleeve, wanting her attention again. She turned to him immediately, as if nothing else mattered. Richard felt a strange mix of admiration and guilt. Here was a woman with so little, yet she gave so much. And he, with everything, hadn't even known how to reach his own son by the time they left that day. Ethan waved goodbye to Anna with both hands, his laughter filling the diner. Richard held his son's hand tightly, but his eyes lingered on the waitress wiping down another table. For the first time in a long while, he questioned the path of his own life. He had wealth, power, and influence, but all of it felt hollow compared to the warmth of a simple connection between a waitress and his son. As he drove home, Ethan fell asleep in the back seat, his toy car clutched in his hand. Richard glanced at him through the mirror, then back at the road. He felt unsettled, as though something inside him had been stirred awake. He didn't know why, but he knew he would be back at that diner again. Not just for the food, not even just for his son. Something deeper was pulling him there, something he wasn't ready to name yet. The evening was colder than usual, and the diner glowed warmly against the dark street outside. Richard guided Ethan through the door, hoping for a calm dinner. His schedule had been packed all day, meetings stretching one after another, his mind full of numbers and strategies. He had promised himself this dinner would be a way to relax with his son. But even as they walked inside, he felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Crowds, noise, and new places often overwhelmed Ethan, and Richard was never sure how to handle it. The diner was half full, the clatter of plates and low chatter filling the room. Ethan pressed closer to his father, clutching his toy car tightly. He was already restless, his eyes darting around, his hum rising in pitch. Richard felt his nerves stretch thin. He told himself it would be fine once they sat down. He told himself Anna would know how to calm him, though he hated relying on a stranger for that. They slid into their usual booth. But tonight Ethan wasn't interested in pancakes or chocolate milk. He started rocking back and forth, covering his ears, when a burst of laughter came from a nearby table. Richard tried speaking softly, but his son wouldn't look at him. Panic flickered inside Richard. He glanced around, feeling the stares of other customers, the whispers he imagined in their voices. Then Ethan let out a sharp cry, louder this time. He kicked at the table, knocking over a spoon. Richard froze. He had faced boardrooms of powerful men without breaking a sweat, but here, with his child trembling and wailing, he felt powerless. His hand hovered in the air, unsure whether to comfort or scold. His throat tightened. He didn't know what to do. That was when Anna appeared. She moved quickly, her face calm, not at all alarmed by the scene. She didn't look at Richard with judgment, didn't glance at the curious customers. Instead, she focused entirely on Ethan. She crouched beside him, lowering herself so her eyes were level with his. In a voice barely louder than a whisper, she began to hum. It wasn't a song Richard recognized, but it was steady, gentle. It's the kind of sound that wrapped itself around the boy like a blanket. Ethan's cries softened almost immediately. He leaned toward her, his breath hitching, small tears glistening on his cheeks. She reached out carefully, giving him time to decide, and when he allowed it, she held him close against her shoulder. She rocked him slightly, her humming never breaking rhythm. Richard sat frozen, staring at the sight. His son, who often resisted touch, was clinging to Anna as though she was the safest place in the world. The boy's body slowly relaxed, his cries fading to soft hiccups. Within minutes, the storm had passed, and Ethan's eyes closed halfway. His hands still clutching his toy car, but his face calm again. The diner's noise returned to normal, the moment fading for everyone else, but Richard couldn't move. His chest felt heavy. He had spent years trying to comfort his son during meltdowns, often failing, often losing his patience. He had bought expensive sensory tools, hired specialists to coach him, and in the middle of a crowded diner, a young waitress with no training had done what he could not. Anna looked up at him briefly. Her eyes were kind but steady, as if to say it's okay. Richard swallowed hard, his pride stinging. He wanted to thank her, but the words stuck in his throat. He felt useless. Reduced from the powerful man he was in the outside world to a father, couldn't calm his own child. When Ethan was calm enough, Anna gently placed him back in the booth, smoothing his hair with a tenderness that caught Richard off guard. She brought over a small cup of chocolate milk, setting it in front of the boy as though nothing unusual had happened. Ethan sipped it slowly, leaning back against the seat, his eyes still following her every movement. Richard pulled out his wallet, fumbling with a bill far larger than the meal cost. He placed it on the table, his hand trembling slightly. For your time, he muttered, his voice low. Anna glanced at the money, then at him. She shook her head. You don't need to do that, she said gently. I'm just doing my job. He pushed the bill closer. This is more than a job, he said, almost sharper than he meant to. His eyes dropped to his son, who was calm again, and his voice softened. You did what I couldn't. Anna hesitated, then accepted it. Not out of greed, but because she understood arguing would embarrass him. She tucked it away quickly, her focus returning to Ethan, asking if he wanted more pancakes. The boy nodded, his earlier distress already forgotten. That night, as they left the diner, Richard felt unsettled. He strapped Ethan into the car seat, but his mind was elsewhere. He had seen himself mirrored in that moment of panic, helpless and uncertain. While someone else's stranger had stepped in with confidence and grace, the shame gnawed at him, but beneath it was something else. Admiration, the next day. He couldn't shake the memory. He thought about Anna's calm presence, the way Ethan trusted her so completely. The thought grew louder until he couldn't ignore it anymore. That evening, after pacing in his study for hours, he made a decision. When they returned to the diner later that week, he waited until Ethan was distracted with his toy before he leaned across the table and spoke to Anna in a low voice. Would you consider working with Ethan privately? He asked. She blinked, taken aback. What do you mean? You have a way with him, Richard said, his words stumbling slightly. "He listens to you. He feels safe with you. I'd like to hire you. Not as a waitress, but as someone who can spend time with him. Maybe help him." Anna's eyes widened. She glanced at Ethan, who was smiling at her, then back at Richard. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said carefully. "I'm not trained for that. And I can't just leave my job here." Richard felt frustration rise. He wasn't used to people refusing him. He leaned back, trying to steady his tone. "I'll pay you more than you make here. You won't have to worry about bills." But Anna shook her head again, firmer this time. "It's not about money. It wouldn't be right, and I need this job. It's steady." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Besides, people might misunderstand." Richard followed her gaze and noticed a couple of waiters at the counter whispering, glancing in their direction. Heat rose to his face. He realized how it looked, a billionaire making unusual offers to a young waitress. That evening ended tensely. Ethan was cheerful as always, but Richard felt the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on him. As he walked out of the diner with his son, he wondered if he had crossed a line. Was he asking for help because of his son's needs? Or was there another reason drawing him toward Anna? The question lingered, refusing to leave his mind. A few days later, Richard found himself pacing the halls of his mansion, feeling both excitement and nervousness. He had thought about Anna nonstop since the diner incident. He knew she was right to hesitate. She wasn't trained for what he had in mind. And she had a steady job she couldn't just walk away from. Yet he couldn't ignore the fact that Ethan responded to her in ways he never had. Something inside him told him that if he wanted his son to thrive, he had to find a way to bring Anna into their lives. When he called her that evening, his voice was steady, though inside he felt jittery. "Anna," he began, "I understand if you don't want to leave your job, but I want you to spend more time with Ethan, not as a distraction, not as charity, but as someone who can help him grow. I'll make sure it doesn't interfere with your life, and you can refuse any time you want." There was a long pause on the line, and Richard felt his heart pound. Then Anna spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't know if I can do it," she admitted. "I don't know if I'm the right person. And I don't want to take advantage of you or your son." "You won't," Richard said. "I'm asking you because you've already shown me that you can reach him in ways I never could. I want you to continue doing that, and I'll respect your boundaries." She finally agreed, hesitantly. The next day, Anna arrived at the mansion, carrying a small bag with Ethan's favorite snacks and a few toys she had noticed he liked at the diner. Richard met her at the door, unsure of how to behave around someone who had become so important to his private life. Without ever meaning to, Ethan's eyes lit up the moment he saw her. "Anna," he squealed, rushing forward. She crouched down, letting him leap into her arms. Richard watched quietly, his chest tightening. He had never seen his son so excited to see anyone. The sight filled him with gratitude, but also a quiet guilt for all the times he had failed to connect over the next few hours. Anna stayed focused entirely on Ethan. She encouraged him to try small exercises, guided him in picking up toys, and praised his successes. Ethan laughed more than he ever had in the mansion, sometimes clapping his hands in delight, sometimes hugging her unexpectedly. Richard observed from a distance, his heart swelling. He noticed the little things, the way Ethan relaxed when Anna was near, the way he tried new movements without fear, the way his eyes sparkled with confidence. Richard realized he had been missing this. All the money in the world, all the therapists and gadgets, hadn't given Ethan the patience, understanding, and gentle encouragement that Anna provided naturally. Watching her interact with his son, Richard felt a strange mix of admiration and humility. She had no obligation to him, yet she gave freely, entirely, effortlessly. As the days passed, Richard began to adjust his own behavior. He tried to follow Anna's lead, copying the way she spoke to Ethan softly, giving him time to respond, celebrating his small achievements. It was awkward at first. He stumbled over words, sometimes raised his voice unintentionally. But Anna corrected him gently, showing him that patience was more powerful than perfection. The bond between Ethan and Anna deepened quickly. He began to show progress in small ways. He tried walking a little more steadily, attempted to stack blocks higher than before, and even attempted words with her guidance. Each time he succeeded, Anna celebrated with him, not with overexcitement, but with a warm, genuine joy that made him feel proud. Richard noticed that his own relationship with Ethan was changing too. He spent less time on calls and emails during their sessions, more time focusing on his son, asking questions about his feelings, and learning how to communicate better. The mansion, once quiet and lonely, now echoed with laughter, soft conversation, and the occasional delighted squeal from Ethan. Anna also began to open up about her life. She told Richard about her long shifts at the diner, about caring for her younger siblings, and about her dream to become a physical therapist. Richard listened, genuinely interested, feeling a connection he hadn't expected. She was honest, hardworking, and resilient, and he found himself respecting her even more. Her world was small compared to his, yet she carried herself with a strength that made him reflect on his own life. One afternoon, Waitress suggested they go outside for a little exercise in the garden. Ethan toddled alongside Anna, holding her hand, laughing whenever she tickled him. Richard followed slowly, watching. He noticed how Anna encouraged Ethan without rushing him, letting him try and fail, then cheering him on. He realized this was more than just patience, it was love in its simplest form. Over time, Richard and Anna developed a rhythm. Anna would spend a few hours a day with Ethan, teaching him, guiding him, playing with him, while Richard observed, learned, and sometimes joined in. The sessions became a safe space for Ethan, a place where he could explore and grow without fear. Richard's admiration for Anna slowly deepened into something more personal. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't around, wondering about her dreams, her struggles, and her happiness. He had never felt this way about anyone outside business. Yet he kept it private, focusing on the most important thing, Ethan. One evening, after a long session filled with laughter and small triumphs, Richard found himself thanking Anna quietly. "I don't know what I would do without you," he said, his voice low, almost vulnerable. She smiled softly, brushing it off, but he could see that she understood the gravity of his words. Ethan, tired but happy, rested his head against Anna's shoulder as she carried him to his room. Richard watched the two of them, a swell of emotion filling him. The billionaire had everything money could buy, yet what truly mattered: connection, trust. Love had come from a young woman with a warm heart and steady hands. By the end of the week, Richard realized his life had begun to shift. He spent more time with his son, less time chasing deals, learned to appreciate the small moments, the laughter, the first successful step, the quiet triumphs. Anna had become more than a helper. She had become the bridge to the kind of fatherhood he had always wanted but never knew how to achieve. He also noticed a change in himself. Watching her patience, her kindness, and the way she inspired his son to grow, he felt humility where once there was pride, patience where there had been impatience, and hope where there had been doubt. Richard understood that money had never been enough to fill the gaps in his family life. What Ethan needed most was someone who could connect, love, and guide him. And Anna was doing that naturally. By the time the weekend arrived, Ethan was thriving in ways Richard hadn't imagined. The boy laughed freely, tried new exercises, and clung to Anna with confidence. Richard, quietly observing, felt a warmth he had long forgotten. For the first time, he realized that true success wasn't measured in wealth or power, it was measured in love. Growth and connection. Anna had brought all of that into their lives. Not as a favor, not as charity, but as a gift of her heart and skill. Richard silently vowed to respect her, protect her, and, most importantly, learn from her. Knowing that she had already taught him more about being a father than anyone else ever could. Weeks had passed since Anna had begun spending regular time with Ethan, and the change in the boy was remarkable. He walked more steadily, spoke a few more words, and, most importantly, laughed freely without hesitation. Richard watched quietly from the doorway or from across the room, amazed at the transformation. Every small achievement Ethan made felt monumental, and Anna was always there to celebrate each victory with warmth and encouragement. Richard had learned to step back, to let her guide the process, and to follow her lead. He no longer tried to control every moment, no longer dictated every exercise or intervention. He simply observed, learned, and sometimes joined in. Slowly, he felt the bond with his son deepen, a bond that was no longer filled with frustration or guilt, but with understanding, patience, and quiet joy. One afternoon, Richard made a decision. He wanted to support Anna's dream without imposing on her pride. She had mentioned wanting to become a physical therapist, to study and work with children like Ethan, but her financial situation had made it seem impossible. Richard began researching scholarships and grants that could cover her tuition without her needing to ask for charity. After some work, he arranged a full scholarship for her, fully funded, under the guise of an anonymous donation to a foundation for young therapists. When he told her, she was speechless. I don't know what to say," she stammered, blinking rapidly. Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I can't accept this. I can't take your money. I can't." "It's not a gift to me," Richard said softly, keeping his voice calm. "It's for you. It's for your future. You've given Ethan more than anyone could have imagined. This is just a way of making sure you can achieve your own dreams too. You don't owe me anything." Anna hesitated, then finally accepted, realizing he was sincere. She hugged Ethan close, her heart full, and even Richard felt moved seeing the joy in both of them. He realized then that true generosity was not about money. It was about creating opportunities and empowering someone who deserved it. Life settled into a new rhythm. Anna spent mornings with Ethan, teaching him and playing with him. Richard made himself available in the afternoons, gradually learning to participate without overwhelming the boy. Their home, once quiet and distant, was now filled with laughter, playful chatter, and moments of quiet pride. Ethan was flourishing. Richard felt hope and joy he had never experienced before. The billionaire father, once distant and preoccupied with work, had changed. He learned to appreciate patience over perfection, love over control, and connection over wealth. Watching Anna with Ethan showed him the value of humility, compassion, and attentiveness. He began applying these lessons to his own life, both as a father and as a man. As for Anna, she had found more than just a scholarship. She had found purpose, friendship, and respect. Richard never pressured her, never overstepped boundaries. And she thrived in this space where her skill and heart mattered more than anything else. She had earned his trust, and in turn, she taught him how to become the father he had always wanted to be. One day, as they were sitting together in the garden, Ethan tried to climb a small step alone. He wobbled, almost fell, but Anna caught him gently, smiling and encouraging him to try again. He succeeded on the second attempt, throwing his arms around her in a triumphant hug. Richard clapped quietly, feeling a warmth he had never felt before. He realized that moments like these, the first successful step, the spontaneous laugh, the shy smile, were priceless. Money could not buy them. Later that evening, as Anna prepared to leave for the day, she turned to Richard. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not for the scholarship, but for trusting her, for respecting her, for letting her help Ethan without judgment." Richard nodded, a faint smile on his face. "No, thank you," he said quietly. "You've changed all of us. Ethan, me. Even the house feels different now. You've given us something we didn't even know we were missing." Anna smiled back, her eyes reflecting genuine gratitude. Ethan waved her goodbye, his tiny voice calling her name. She waved back, walking away with the same gentle grace that had captivated Richard from the start. Richard stood at the window, watching her go. He reflected on how a simple act of kindness, holding his son, speaking softly, giving attention without expectation, had transformed not only Ethan's life, but his own. He understood finally that love, patience, and compassion were more powerful than any fortune. The following weeks brought small but meaningful changes. Richard found himself spending evenings reading to Ethan, helping him practice new words, and even playing simple games he had never thought would hold his interest. Ethan laughed more freely, slept more peacefully, and looked forward to each day with Anna's guidance and his father's growing attention. Eventually, the world began to notice the subtle change in Richard as well. He no longer appeared as the distant, always busy businessman. Instead, He carried a gentleness, a humility, and a warmth that surprised those who knew him. Friends and colleagues remarked on his softened demeanor, but he only smiled quietly, knowing the real change had nothing to do with them. It was about the joy and trust he had built at home. Anna continued her work, now with the scholarship secured, and she remained a guiding presence in Ethan's life. Her influence had created a foundation of confidence and happiness for him that no amount of money or therapy could replace. She had helped him, and through him, she had helped Richard discover a new way to live. One quiet evening, as the three of them sat together in the garden watching the sunset, Ethan leaned against Anna and held his father's hand. Richard glanced at them, feeling a sense of fulfillment and serenity he had never known. He understood that life's greatest gifts were not wealth, titles, or possessions. They were the bonds forged through care, trust, and unconditional support in that moment. Richard realized the world had changed for him, not because of business or money, but because of a young woman who had simply held his son. She had sparked a transformation that rippled through their lives, teaching them the importance of empathy, connection, and love. Ethan laughed. Anna smiled, and Richard felt a sense of peace. The house was no longer just a mansion. It was a home filled with joy, hope, and the kind of family connection he had longed for but never truly had. He knew that the bond they had all formed would last a lifetime. Through Anna's guidance, Ethan continued to flourish, and Richard continued to learn. Together they discovered that sometimes the smallest acts, an outstretched hand, a comforting hug, a gentle word could change everything. Money and power could open doors, but it was compassion, patience, and love that built a life worth living. And as they sat together, the sunset painting the sky in warm colors, Richard understood that this simple, unexpected connection had forever altered their lives. He smiled, quietly grateful for Anna, for Ethan, and for the moment when everything had changed.